Hi, thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Holly Antel, and this is a video overview of my latest work, Foundations of a Rational Theology. This topic is very important to me, and I think it should be important for everyone. We exist, therefore we are, as Rene Descartes famously said, I think, therefore I am. We think, therefore we are. And we exist. And we're individual consciousness, and we exist within a material reality that includes suffering. Um, and so, whether or not we are created, whether or not we're going to be here for an eternity, these are very important questions. Um, as just someone who exists. And I exist, and those who are watching this obviously exist. And so this topic, I think, is really important to understand. And, religion doesn't really do it justice, neither does science or philosophy. Uh, Discussions of God or theology are often politicized, and it's a political issue more than a rational one. Um, which results in a lot of disputes and conflicts surrounding these ideas. So, what I'm attempting to do here is to create just a kind of solid, rational framework to describe God in a way that does not invoke religious dogma or spirituality or anything like that. So, I'm going to share my screen. This is the portfolio I'll be referring to. It will be linked in the description of this YouTube video. All of this research is independent, and it's a lot of hard work, so I definitely appreciate any donations to my Cash App. That cash tag is CoffeeCrow420. So I created this yesterday. I've combined a few essays that I have done, as well as another portfolio that I created and have now deleted. Um, Kind of combine them into one and simplified it in order to really do a broad kind of what's called systematic theology uh, with it. Systematic theology is the branch of theological study that deals with creating unifying theories or complete theories surrounding God and existence and the meaning of life. And this is what this attempts to do, which is create an alternative theory compared to religion and other types of belief that explain existence, life on earth, God, heaven, and all of these kinds of concepts. Um, like I said before, we exist and it's possibly forever, and we are capable of experiencing suffering. So it's really important, I think, to understand, the nature of God, the nature of intelligent design, why we are here, what our purpose is, especially if we're going to be here forever. We want to make sure it's going to be a good time. So, uh, I really appreciate you joining me on this exploration. Um, I'm very scientific and math minded. I do like science. Uh, However, the main thing I disagree with science is that, I believe we are intelligently designed. And I honestly speculate that there is sound science out there that points to intelligent design. I think we were created in order to discover the truth, to learn the truth, and to know our place and to understand God, with what we can discern from our environments and our subjective experiences. Um, it's hard to speak on what God intended, but it's worth speculating on because here we are with proximity to Him, and that has consequences for all of us. Um, but as I've said before, religion and God and these discussions often get politicized, um, often to promote systems of money and hierarchy and fear and all of that. And many religions don't really describe a morally good God. If you look at Christianity, which is what I'm most familiar of, uh, and the concept of Jesus, I personally think that describes a pretty morally reprehensible God. Um, to have a favorite child and to have them go through that in order to have evil people be able to just believe and get into eternal paradise that way. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me rationally. And talking about like God intervening and with floods and stuff in the Old Testament, it just points to a miserable kind of God. I'm not that familiar with other religions, so I can't really say, but they all, as far as I'm aware, point to a moralistically kind of terrifying God if you really sit and think about it. Um, So, the purpose of this is to like basically draw rational conclusions from just kind of common things that we can all observe, all understand. Uh, One of my chief kind of claims that I have in throughout all of my work is that I think science, and math should be peer reviewable by the public. That's what lends it the most veracity, is that it can be understood, comprehended, and verified, by the public and not just gate kept and verified within academia, which leaves room for a lot of different corruption and agendas and things like that. So, I aim to discuss this in a way that can be understood and kind of verified by anyone, no matter your scientific or religious background. So to start a portfolio of systematic theology, you have to kind of break down like, okay, where do you even begin the discussion of God and the meaning of existence? To me, that starts with defining what God is in the most simplest terms. And what I came up with was an entity capable of creating the physical universe from outside of the universe. So it's basically someone who existed prior to the Big Bang, who existed outside of this universe or outside of the Big Bang and was capable of creating it. So capable of creating this universe and capable of creating conscious, intelligent life, that can sustain in perpetuity. I don't describe God as being eternally old. That's not something that's like knowable. I'm sure God knows it for himself. But it's also possible that he doesn't. That could be a mystery to him. He could be so old that he feels eternal, but he's unsure. That is also a possibility. Um, but I don't think it really matters in terms of theology whether or not God has existed forever or not. He has at least existed long enough to understand how to create this universe, which is incredible, as well as create intelligent life within the universe. Some arguments I've thought of, in favor of intelligent design. Um, like I mentioned, I think that, there probably is science, kind of clandestine science and information out there that has conclusive evidence for intelligent design. I don't think I'm the only person who is scientifically and math-minded who thinks that it's pretty self-evident that it is intelligent designed, our universe and us and everything. Um, But one way to kind of argue that is that, at the beginning with the Big Bang, which I believe the Big Bang is an accurate description of how this universe started and is currently unfolding. Um, if life had spontaneously existed, then it seems like that the genesis within the Big Bang would have been initially chaotic, as in the laws that govern physics and the forces that let physics unfold, in the universe in the way that it does wouldn't have been instantly there. There would have been a period of chaos before the strongest forces overtook the weakest forces, and so on, in order to develop physical laws that could produce kind of this coherent reality that we live within. Um, Instead of initial chaos, in order to evolve forces that, end up controlling it, the Big Bang unfolded in accordance with physical forces, in accordance with physical laws immediately. So the laws that guided the unfolding of the Big Bang, it seems must have existed prior to the Big Bang. Otherwise, they wouldn't have just immediately been there. They would have had to forge themselves and find itself throughout chaos. And so, because the Big Bang occurred and has unfolded with consistent physical laws that we can observe today, um, it seems that this was not something spontaneous that happened, but rather something intentionally that happened. Um, my personal speculation on the Big Bang is that basically God built a bomb. Uh, he put all the elements needed to create this universe and he combined them while they were being heated to an ideal heat state temperature. And what he did to create the Big Bang was after all the elements were combined, he removed that heat, and then the explosion happened uh, in order for atomic matter to find that heat state once again. That's more my work on atomic physics that I'm currently trying to spell out and define mathematically and represent mathematically. Um, but so one reason that I think there's an argument for intelligent design is that the Big Bang immediately followed physical laws and forces that were organizing and organized it to create life. Um, and just so relatively quickly, I believe the Big Bang is like 13.8 billion years ago, and 13.8 billion is a number that we can count to. It's something that we can observe. We can observe, billions of dollars within our economy, billions of grains of sand, uh, and other things. So because 13.8 billion is a number that we can easily comprehend as humans, it seems like a relatively short amount of time to go from just like an explosion with dormant matter to like the precursors to biological life and then eventually biological life. And then here we are, conscious, self-aware, and observing and critically thinking about our reality. So it just happened so fast and it was immediately orderly. It just seems it had to have been intelligent design. Another argument I put forth is that if we did spontaneously exist, why would it be that we wouldn't feel all exertion from our bodies? So our bodies, in order to live, like our cells are constantly moving, our bodies are constantly moving, like continuous movement. Our heartbeat, our breathing, and other functions of the body, it involves continuous movement. And we're not feeling that movement. We only feel movement when we choose to like eat or drink or move our bodies in other ways. So we only really feel physical exertion with movement that we choose rather than all the movement that is required of our bodies. And so it just seems odd that if we spontaneously existed, that life would be this easy. It would be this easy to exist. We don't feel all the movement necessary to keep our bodies alive. We feel very minimal amounts of movement when we are constantly in motion. Um, and so it seems like it would be impossible that if we spontaneously existed, that life would just automatically, be able to live without feeling all the exertion required to live. That seems like it requires intentional, intelligent design in order to happen. Um, Another thing is us as humans, we're a very interesting species. We emerged only a few 100,000 years ago. We're a relatively new species, but right after our emergence, we began to radically interact with the environment in the way that no other animal has done before. We quickly became apex predator, developed language, communication, the modern world. All this happened pretty quick. So it's like the universe wanted us to become conscious. Like it just there seems to be so much intentionality behind it. And the documentary I watched a while ago that talks about how as soon as the conditions for life were met on Earth, it began. So it was like our planet was created, the moon was created, they were balls of magma for a long time, and then it was the primordial soup is the leading theory on it. Um, but it's like as soon as it was possible, as soon as the temperatures were in the correct range, it's like life instantly began. Um, which is very unusual and also points towards intelligent design. Um, and so I think these are some of the biggest kind of arguments I've thought of for the case of intelligent design, but I'm sure I'll think of more, and I'm sure there are more out there. Um, like I said, I think there's probably good science out there that points towards intelligent design, but because politics is divisive and there's fake news and, money and competition and all that, and the truth is not really like an inalienable right as it should be. We're constantly misinformed and attenuated with propaganda and lies and misinformation and disinformation. I reason that information surrounding the truth of God and reality is intentionally obfuscated if it's out there, in terms of science. So how many gods can possibly exist? So you You rationalize, you reason that there is a God, at least one God, or that we were intelligently designed. You come to that conclusion. Um, and the next kind of scary question is, how many gods are there? And because if there's more, it's like, well, is one good, one evil? Is there one good, 12 evil? Like what's going on? We were intelligently designed. What is the nature of that creator and how many are there? Um, it's something I've pondered for a long time. Like, how do you figure this out using logical methods? And I called this problem 1, 2, 3, 4 quorum. Um, I originally thought five was the quorum. And what I mean by quorum is locating the number of gods where the probability of that number of gods occurring is the same probability of any number of gods occurring. So it was basically like finding where on the number line does it begin where that number has equal probability to any number of gods. And to me, that would figuring out what number that is would help locate the number of gods or the number of possible gods. I originally thought it was five. Like once you got to five gods, five was the equal probability to any number of gods. But then I applied set theory to this problem, and I drew the conclusion that two is that number. So two creates the quorum where two gods has the same probability as any number of gods. Um, so this uses sets in philosophy. Sets are just a way to categorize things, and they're arbitrary, so they can be about anything. Um, the set of things I like includes coffee, for example. A set of all things blue. It does include the shirt. There's blue in the shirt. Um, and like I said in here, the set of all rodents includes every squirrel and mouse that's ever scurried on this planet, as well as hamsters, rats, and all the other beautiful rodents out there. I like rodents. They're one of my favorite animals. So using set theory, I've applied it to prior to the Big Bang, so when God existed by himself. How many what's the like smallest number of fundamental sets we can say about God prior to the Big Bang when he existed by himself? And I came to there's two sets for that. So all things that are God and all things that are not God are the two fundamental sets that existed prior to the Big Bang. So that every part of God's composition and who he is would be included in the set of all things that are God, and then his environment and anything else that is separate from him within his reality would be in the set of all things that are not God. And so with one God, you can come up with those two clean sets, everything that is God, everything that is not God. But then when you consider two gods, the logical number of like initial sets is everything that is God 1, everything that is God 2, everything that is not God 1, everything that is not God 2, and everything that is neither God. And with subsequent gods, this follows a math problem. I didn't include it in here, but it's kind of like times two plus one is so whatever number of gods times two plus one ends up being what the initial number of sets is. For two gods, is five. So for three gods, it would be seven. Um, so in here, you get a couple of problems. One is that God one doesn't exist in a set that describes completely just that God. He exists in multiple sets. Everything that is God one and everything that is not God two. Those are two sets he exists in. So that kind of creates a problem where when you consider multiple gods, they can exist in different sets. And then it becomes even more complicated if they share any kind of composition, or if they've ever shared any kind of composition, or if there are different way sets that can be created because of their prior interaction. And that ends up being an infinite number if you consider it in that way. So when you consider one God, it's the only one that you can just describe it cleanly using two sets. Um, and I think these things are meant to be understood in very simplified ways with references to simple numbers and representations. So the idea that you can describe all things prior to the Big Bang with two sets if you have one God is a very clean kind of way to represent uh, what existed. Um, and that clean kind of two sets can only be done with one God. So that's one logical method I think that kind of reveals that answer. Of course, there could be more and this could be disputed, but this is the most kind of logical way I've thought of to conceptualize figuring out this problem. So the nature of God. Here's where I really stray from religion and common ideas about God. Most religion describes God as being all powerful and all knowing and all present. Um, and I think those three characteristics kind of negate any possibility of God ever enjoying himself. Um, so if God is all powerful, that means that everything he can possibly interact with in reality has equal value. He has equal access to it, which kind of reduces it to having the kind of the same meaning and kind of the no variation involved. Um, and I think that we can self-reference a little bit within our own experience as single consciousnesses within a body in order to kind of comprehend what God's experience is like or what God is like. Um, and so because we have experiential variation in meaning and different things throughout our environment, uh, I think it can be deduced that God is the same way. So not everything has the same value or the same meaning or the ability for him to access it. Because that would just kind of give rise to a meaningless existence. It would eradicate ideas like being able to think creatively or critically, as well as have goals and challenges that you have to overcome in order to meet those goals. And I feel like creation was a goal and probably a challenge of God, because it seems that life cannot just exist out of anything. There are certain substructures, how our cells move and atoms move. Like, there are certain things that give rise to life. Not everything can give rise to life. If God was all powerful, he'd be able to make anything create life. But life is very particular, and our bodies are designed in a very particular way. Um, and so it seems that, creating creation was a goal that he had. Uh, and it was challenging because he had to do it in a certain way in order to get it done. And so, because that seems apparent, that would negate any premise of being all powerful. Because he's all powerful, he just snap his fingers and be done. Um, so related to that, is being omniscient or all knowing. Um, which I believe he would have to be all powerful in order to be all knowing, or vice versa. They definitely feed into each other. Um, I reason that God is not all knowing because knowing everything that will happen before it will happen, basically experiencing it before it happens, being able to predict everything, having no novelty, nothing unknown, that would create a very boring and repetitive existence. And if God's of high intelligence, which he obviously is, he created this universe and he created conscious life. And I'm obviously not God, but I consider myself, pretty intelligent, and I get bored really easily. And I could not imagine, being able to predict everything about my future and being able to know everything that would happen. That would just be so boring. And my intelligence is very small compared to God's. And so it's like if I would find that boring, it seems to follow that he would find that boring. And if other people self-reference and you think critically about it, being able to predict everything and do anything that you want, nothing, it is beyond your power. I think you would find that pretty boring. And so I think we can reasonably conclude that God would find that pretty boring. Anyone of high intelligence likes having stimulation, likes having complex conversations and meaningful relationships and all these different things. That gives rise to having a good time and having pleasurable experiences. So it seems that God would be reflective of that and get variation and meaning and different types of good experiences out of life because he's not all knowing and all powerful. And then as for all present, if he was all present as in observing every aspect of reality at once, that would merge towards all knowing. Because if you're observing everything, like observing everything at every level, and have always had observed everything at every level and have memory of where it's been, all the atoms that are in this lighter, knowing how, being able to trace them prior to the Big Bang and what they did, that verges upon all knowing. But also it's morally wrong to be all present. And it seems that, we were designed for autonomy and independence and to be, free agents. Um, and also that God is not some kind of puppet or intervening and picking favorites and all of that in terms of who lives and who dies um, with tragedies and all that. People say, oh, they were saved by God. And it's like, well, you're kind of implying that those who passed were not saved by God, which is pretty rude. But I don't think that's true. I think he's very limited in how he can interact, and that was a moral choice. Um, because independence and individual liberty and autonomy is an important virtue to him for the other. Um, this is just I'm not going to get too heavy in the math, but it's just a quick theorem to represent non-omniscience. Um, if knowledge is constantly expanding, like what is known and what is unknown are both constantly expanding, um, and it can also not entirely be known. It's like the possible, like what can possibly be known about reality is shrinking towards zero because reality is constantly unfolding and creating new information. It's the present moment unfolds, it creates new information. And so And as people are born and live their lives, they discover things or do things that creates more information, more things to know. So as the present moment unfolds, there's always more information being created. And if God only has like a loci of consciousness and can only perceive like a few things at a time, um, then that is growing at a rate that he is not actively watching or knowing about. Thus, what he can possibly know shrinks to zero, as well as what us in creation can possibly know shrinks to zero as the present moment unfolds and information is constantly being formed. And this just kind of represents that using some calculus equations. So I reference Immanuel Kant and Jean-Paul Sartre in here, two philosophers I've studied, and defining a moral creator. Like, so what is a moral God? It doesn't sound like how he's described that. The Bible doesn't describe a moral God to me, at least. Um, but to kind of grapple with the morality of God is like, all right, well, what was the intention of us in creation? Like, what did he intend for us? Because that's where morality really counts for us. It's like, oh, hey, I exist in a body and it feels things, including suffering. I want to know what Creator's intention is for this, especially in the long term, and especially that long term is forever. So, it's an important question, but can be a scary question to grapple with, which I think is why people choose religion or they choose paths that kind of give them comfort, um, rather than seek the complete truth on it, because these are kind of scary things to contemplate. But if you look past the comfort and go for like just complete logical reasoning, you can come to a good conclusion that God is good and that we're here for a good purpose. But it takes, eliminating a lot of the kind of existential fears that are out there and hard to eliminate in order to get there. Like philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche kind of went in the opposite direction. He unfortunately went mad before he passed. But it was definitely tied to understanding the nature of God. He famously wrote, God is dead, we have killed him, in his work, The Gay Science. I love Nietzsche. I've studied a lot of existentialist philosophy, and he was a very, very great thinker. But I've also been there. I've been down that kind of Nietzsche abyss where, am I screwed forever? Am I in a bad place forever? Is God evil? Are humans doomed? I've had to grapple with that and work my way logically out of that, in order to find these conclusions and draw them rationally. So I can definitely relate to Nietzsche's uh, grappling with this. And unfortunately, he did not live to see it resolve, but hopefully he's on the other side and has access to the truth that, brought him the comfort he deserved. Um, So morally good God would create others who are completely independent, autonomous, and have free will, and he would interfere as little as possible with the evolution and the decision making of his creation. Um, to a limit, I think. I think, what humans are up to on this planet is getting a little bit out of hand. I wouldn't be surprised if that changes in the near future or the far future, um, because I don't think we were meant for systems of exploitation and hierarchy that happen through systems of money and that lead to immense unnecessary suffering. I don't think that was intended by God, but it ended up happening as an unintended consequence and something he could not interfere with because he built himself out of the system as a moral choice to be non-interfering and to promote autonomy and independence. And then he had no self-reference point for evil because he's good. And so it was like he locked himself out, and then evil kind of really evolved within humanity, and he couldn't do much about it. So uh, that is one way to consider why there is so much unnecessary suffering. Um, it seems that God created the other or, conscious life in order to have companionship. It would be weird if he created everyone for the purpose of being a companion to him. Um, that would go into a moral bad territory, because we are seen as not seen as ends in of ourselves, or instead seen as means to an end. Um, and that's a philosophy that Immanuel Kant describes. Means to an end is seeing someone for their utility. Like, what can you do for me? That's seeing someone as means to an end. When you're looking to see what you can get out of someone or manipulate, or, when you see someone just for whatever they can possibly provide for you, that is seeing someone as means to an end. Seeing people as ends in of themselves, uh, as Immanuel Kant describes, is seeing people as like you are, kind of the namaste. Uh, you're an independent person with a life and feelings and all this, and you deserve to be respected just as much as I deserve to be respected as an independent person with my own thoughts, feelings, life, and everything. So it's just recognizing that, like, people don't exist to do anything for you. They exist because they exist and it has nothing to do with you. And that's seeing them as ends in of themselves. Um, so it would be kind of moralistically wrong if God created everyone to be his companion, because that's everyone being a means to an end, that's everyone having a utility or having a purpose. I also think it would be morally wrong for God to want, worship or servitude or anything like that from us, in any respect, let alone forever. So, a lot of religions think God wants to be worshiped. I think that would be morally wrong of God to seek our worship. Or so, um, so I do believe that God created the other for companionship, that he does want a companion or companions, but that he would be selective in choosing them, because we are selective in how we choose our relationships and who we're friends with and who we want to be around. God would thus be selective in who he would want as companionship. Be cool if it was me. I don't know. It'd be quite the compliment, but um, it would be immoral if it was everyone, I think. So be cool. Hope it is. But if not, I'm glad that God sees me as an end in of myself in order to pursue other friendships and my own friendships and stuff like that. So either way, it it is only moral if it's selective, and then if the person could, like, say no. Like, no, God, I don't want to be your friend. And he wouldn't just like kill them or destroy them. He let them live on and be an end in of themselves. That's a moral way he could do that. So I do speculate that he did want some companionship, but he's probably alone forever, so he probably doesn't need much in terms of companionship. But in order to have, a few companions or whatever, he had to create a lot of others in order to get them to exist. It seems that would be a reasonable explanation as to why many people exist, why creation exists outright. We're here to exist as ends in of ourselves, as in to exist and enjoy life in perpetuity, but also the purpose of bringing God companionship eventually. Um, I think is the a reasonable take on, why we were created. That is both like he had a reason, but it's not selfish. Um, Reasoning the morality of God is also a difficult task to grapple with. Because you definitely don't want an evil God. That means we're screwed forever. And suffering sucks. So we don't want an evil God. And neutral isn't that great either. Creating for the sake of creation and not caring what happens, so that's not great either. But through kind of logical reason, I've deduced that God is neutral good. Um, so I came to neutral good, and this borrows from Dungeons and Dragons. They define lawful and chaotic and good and evil probably differently than I do, but this is uh, applying to, a creator, intelligent designer. Um, So I define lawful here very as simply as I can, which is maximizing predictability and minimizing disorder, whereas chaotic is the opposite of minimizing predictability and maximizing disorder. Neutral on the spectrum is selectively utilizing both predictability and disorder. A good God would abhor unnecessary suffering and the idea of controlling others, and he would want enduring happiness for others. He wants the best for us. Um, Evil is the opposite, as a God desiring unnecessary suffering and to control others while abhorring the idea of enduring happiness for others. And then neutral is apathy towards suffering or happiness of creation. Um, I would say by kind of looking at life and, what's objectively observable, that God is neutral good. Um, I say neutral because, the universe unfolds according to properties and laws that are predictable. Um, but there is some aspect of chaos or randomization. Um, part of that randomization would be like our individual consciousness and our individual personalities. Everyone's very different. I think God kind of like set up uh some foundational aspects about our personalities or personhood, but that through our free will action and choices and unique memories and lives, we become individuals. And that can't necessarily be predicted, like who we become given our how our life unfolds. And not everything is predictable, and that's a good thing, because it goes back to um why omniscience is a bad thing and it's too much predictability. So I rate God as neutral here because he incorporates both predictability and chaos, um but for good reason. So, as for reasoning why God is good, I think it's evident that, God has never directly communicated or interacted with humans. He's been very hands off, which promotes autonomy, independence. Um, and these are kind of the opposite of control. So he doesn't seem very controlling, like he's in control of things. He's letting life unfold the way that it organically wants to. So he doesn't seem like a very controlling kind of entity if you consider, our freedom and his non-intervention with creation. Um, Also, lives are relatively short, very short if you compare it to an eternity, so that, there is a kind of fail safe in that, we die relatively quick. If we and it, Which is a good thing if we're experiencing a lot of unnecessary suffering that we cannot escape from. Um, and another argument for why God would be good rather than evil is that it goes back to the paradox of omniscience, where um, an evil God wanting just to like torture and cause creation to suffer, it would just be a repetitive thing. How we respond to suffering is primarily like, very similar and repetitive. Like, I'll make it stop. I want this to stop. I want this to end. Um, So it would just be creating creation to just be like repeating that constantly with, slightly different variations as to why we want to stop suffering. which goes back into like very repetitive, predictable outcomes. And it's like, why would we evolve to have this kind of intelligence and this kind of comprehension just to be reduced to a state of only thinking and saying a few things in repetition forever? So I think an evil God is pretty paradoxical, especially given what we can observe about life and this universe. So suffering can be a hard one to grapple with. I think suffering has a purpose and it's not all bad. Um, Suffering is the endurance of physical, emotional, or mental pain, injury, illness, or distress. Um, One utility of suffering is that it acts like a boundary. Um, if life cannot be made of just anything, but it has to be made of certain things, we were born in a dangerous world and we have to learn for ourselves how to survive. And because God not isn't because God is not an interventionist, we have to learn that for ourselves. We have to learn how to survive. We have to learn how to live. We have to do all these things without getting direct instructions from him on like what we're supposed to be doing here. But, volcanoes are hot, but they're necessary, part of our atmosphere and the water cycle. So, but, they're hot, so we know to stay away from them. Um, Fire burns us because it teaches us that like our bodies will deteriorate if we get smothered in flames. Um, our bodies suffer if we don't eat and drink. So we have suffering is a way to kind of show us how to keep ourselves alive. It shows us the boundaries of existence, like, don't walk into that hot lava pool or that geyser. Um, it gives us boundaries and it kind of teaches us how to survive. It keeps us in line with our survival and with our flourishing. Um, it also, I speculate, produces pleasure. Um, and the example I often give is the hunger, right? I'd rather be a little bit hungry sometimes and be able to eat, 'cause eating is great. I love food. Um, Rather than just being full all the time. So not needing food, not ever getting hungry, but then not ever experiencing the pleasure of food. So it's like eating when you're full isn't that good. When you eat when you're full, it just doesn't taste as good with that as when you're a little bit hungry. Um, and so instead of just full all the time and not needing to eat, ebbing between hunger and eating makes it a pleasurable experience. Another thing is I'm a smoker. I enjoy smoking. I enjoy every aspect of it, unfortunately. But it does, have a little bit of pain involved, but it's pain that I don't even notice. I just find the whole experience pleasurable. Um, but it technically does contain pain. So I think necessary suffering and controlled suffering does have good purpose and it can bring about pleasure, bring about experiential variation. Um, However, there is unnecessary suffering, and that is not intended, I think, by the intelligent design of existence, and is a byproduct of human free will. Unnecessary suffering has no inherent utility or benefit, and it has no purpose or meaning. Um, it just happens because for some reason humans have developed to want it because it brings them comfort to see others suffer or to control others, or it brings them some kind of sick pleasure. Um, I don't think that was intended. It just kind of happened and it evolved. The other is complicated. And, any type of other can exist when you're thinking about the other from that kind of divine perspective. And so it just kind of happened. And because God, is not an interventionist with reality, not much can be done. Um, but I do speculate that God will be within this universe eventually, um, and that this universe was created to be heaven for both God and his creation. Um, and that the lived human experience is kind of the peak experience. It's not as good as it can be because of unnecessary suffering and evil and these awful systems on our planet. But being able to eat, the kind of pleasures we feel, the relationships we can have, the things that we can do, I think are a beautiful start to what would be like heaven, minus, of course, all the unnecessary evil and suffering on the planet. But it seems that the human life is kind of peak existence, and the kind of variation and pleasures we can feel is the apex of existence, and I think is kind represents the baseline reality for what heaven's going to be like. Um, which I'll jump to that really quick. Um, Another thing is that it would be morally correct for God to give us an idea of what eternity is going to look like rather than blast us off into something completely unknowable from this perspective here on Earth. So in order for us to like have informed consent with like, yeah, I do want to live forever. I like what I get out of this life. I would like to minimize that unnecessary suffering. Uh I would like to eradicate actually the necessary suffering, minimize unnecessary suffering, and then like, yeah, as long as I can always have new conversations with my friends as long as my, relationships of love will always grow deeper over time. As long as like my interests and hobbies will always be enjoyable to me. And there will always be potential to find new hobbies to do and new stuff to do and new things to explore. Um, I said in some other writing that I think the best Sisyphean dilemma. Uh, Sisyphus is an ancient Greek myth about a man who was punished by the gods for rolling up a boulder up a hill or up a mountain for all of eternity. And when he got to the top of the mountain with the boulder, it always falls back down. So money is the current Sisyphean dilemma on this planet. You have to make a lot of it, and then you spend it all, and it's gone. Then you have to go back to work and make a lot of it. Um, but I think the true Sisyphean dilemmas that make for a good life and a good quality of life, and that can, exist in perpetuity in ways that don't get boring, are curiosity and creativity. So science having no limits on what can be scientifically created or discovered, as well as creativity having no limits in terms of arts and humanities and what we can do with our creativity. So these things never becoming stagnant, always having some kind of novelty or newness, while keeping what we experience as like kind of the baseline reality, but just what we can do. Uh, there's always novelty and ability to do more and new things. And then, what maintains the same would be like our relationships and our friendships, but they're always fun. We always have new stuff to talk about. The stuff we like doing never gets boring. So if we can keep the stuff we enjoy and the relationships and the conversations we enjoy, and they can always get better in terms of enjoyment, and they don't degenerate into anhedonia or become numb to them or we get bored of them or whatever. Um, that to me seems like, yeah, that could be heaven. That sounds like heaven. And it seems like a more legal God would, show us what heaven is like rather than have it be something completely unexpected or unintelligible. So I've concluded that I think this universe and the human life, or what humans can do, is like the peak of existence, like the apex of existence, and that is what heaven is existing within a human body within this universe. But given, cooperation among those who exist and no evil and unnecessary suffering. And so with that, I think the meaning of the human life is as an ethical free will test. Like it's here to filter out who can cooperate within a shared paradise and then who cannot. Because the other is, so unique. When God created the other, any kind of personality could develop. Had that kind of autonomy and independence so that many different snowflake personalities uh, can occur. And so that was intentional. I think all of us to have our unique perspectives and personalities and individualities. But with that comes the risk of evil people. And so the human life is short because it's meant to kind of root out evil people that cannot cooperate, that seek harming and controlling others as a pleasure or as a comfort, and refuse not to do anything else about it. Um, so I think that, God intended heaven only for people who do the basic, moral principle, do unto others you have done unto yourself. It's taught that in many religions, and I think it's a very important principle, but it's also just like if you're a morally good person, you experience suffering. You don't need religion to teach you this. You experience suffering and then you experience pleasure and then you encounter other people. And if you generally like them or are a good person, it's like, I don't want you to suffer. I know what suffering is like. I don't want that for you. I know what pleasure is like. I want our interaction to be amicable and as pleasurable as it can be. I've always had that kind of moral stance. I don't like my own suffering. I never want to be the cause of someone else's suffering. Um, and so I think that is like the basic kind of free will test, and many people are like that. Um, I don't think it's that complicated. I think ensuring your own survival and liberty comes first, unfortunately, in terms of ethics, 'cause I also study ethics a lot. Ensuring your own survival and liberty comes first. And so so you first ensure your own survival and liberty, and then after that, it is due unto others, you've done unto you. And so by naming ensuring your own survival and liberty as an ethical principle, it kind of helps that gray area of self-defense and all these kind of situations that we get ourselves in where we are forced to do unethical things because it's either us or them. Um, or, stuff is being done to you that you have to fight fire with fire with. Uh, so I think adding survivability and freedom, ensuring that for yourself as the first ethical principle, and then the second one being do unto others, is a pretty clean moral test. That I think is the point of our lifetime. Um, and people who do wrong with their free will, it seems obvious they would not be allowed into heaven. But it seems like hell is definitely a potential or some kind of justice for causing unnecessary suffering and for harming the innocent. Um, I'm sure God never anticipated that it would get as bad as it did. Um, and it seems like justice would be a morally good answer to that. Um, to ensure that paradise remains paradise and never devolves into what we see on earth, for example, God has to separate those who can use their free will in non-harmful ways and those who cannot. And by removing those who cannot from the universe, a a shared kind of blissful reality can be experienced. And this is just a simple model of exponential growth and decay, which can signify heaven and hell, and then death is represented by zero. Um, because I think, well, not all things that could be functionally represented with math are true and real. For something to be true and real, it has to be functionally representable in math. Um, so when talking about eternal heaven or non-omniscience and these things that I think uh, create the conditions for an eternal heaven, um, I want to know that this can be expressed mathematically because if it can, uh, it kind of lends credence to it and makes it at least a little bit possible. Oh, one other thing is that because I believe this is the human experience is like the peak experience for any entity of high intelligence, including God, that God will eventually arrive within this universe. And when God does arrive in this universe, that's when I believe he will be able to exercise more free will and more intervention than he has been able to before, once he materializes within this universe, because it seems like this is the peak way to live, and that a God would want to do this, or any intelligent or highly intelligent entity would want to live in this way is why we were created. We this is the blueprints of like the way God wants to live. It would seem to be a lot of religion says that like heaven is something completely different. But it seems like a lot of work went into this universe and how life functions here, and so it was made for a reason, not just the free will test that other religions describe. I think that this universe, this material world is heaven. Just now, not how it's functioning now on this planet. Um, but I do think that God will get here eventually. And when he does materialize in this universe, then I believe it's possible that like immortality can be attainable. So those of us who are alive, it'd be cool if I was for God's arrival, we would be able to reach immortality and be able to live on in perpetuity rather than have to die, or have to go through cycles of death and rebirth. Um, so as God materializes here, I believe immortality will become possible on Earth, for those who pass their free will test, uh, so that life can be lived within this universe in perpetuity and in a shared eternal bliss. I think that's kind of the whole point of this. Um, for animals, I believe that all animals go to heaven. That's the most important part. All animals go to heaven. Animals don't have free will like humans do. They're inhibited by the food chain and they cannot manipulate the environment. They don't have opposable thumbs when gorillas do, but they're not capable of manipulating the environment in the way that humans can and have. So there's a couple of factors keeping them on the food chain. But I think well, it's reasonable first to say that God's first experience of the other is with animals. We know that animals, if life only exists on planet Earth, we know that animals came first. Well, first single-celled organisms, but when it comes to like life that's capable of consciousness, it would be animals. And I believe that animals would be conscious as God's first kind of like understanding and studying of the other and what personalities are like. Um, but because they're on the food chain and they don't have free will, their life is not a test of free will. Um, I think it would be most moral if they had a continuity of it, identity throughout their incarnation. So it's like, they first incarnated as a dinosaur and then they've gone through the cycle of life and incarnated several times as different animals, but they still stay the same person, with the same personality and the same identity throughout those incarnations. And I believe that there is a place called the other side, or where people's souls go, or where their consciousness goes, however you want to look at it, when they die. Um, and that's just kind of a holographic overlay on this planet, or on this universe, and it's just a place where you can communicate with others that are there, and be in kind of like a holographic type body, but you don't physically feel things. I speculate that you can feel things emotionally, but not physically. Um, and so animals in between carnations go to the other side where they can, meet up with their friends that they've met in past lives, uh, and, study the earth and see what goes on Earth and other places in the universe in order to get an accurate grasp on life and the meaning of life. But I think people who have died, who passed the free will test, they're on the other side watching over us, judging us, I'm sure, in hilarious ways. But that they will eventually be incarnated, reborn as a human, in order to experience heaven. And that those who pass the free will test go to the other side. And those who do not, I'm not sure where they go, but I don't think it's the shared cooperative existence, those who pass the free will test on the other side. Um, but also because animals have been prevented from using free will, they're able to like learn and understand the gravity of it and understand how to cooperate and use their free will in wise ways. So like that guy kind of set up animals as like a shoe-in for heaven, but they had to pay the kind of like debt of being on the food chain for a long time. But I do think a morally good God would have made that less brutal than it may look to us. The food chain looks very brutal from a human perspective. I'm very grateful that I'm not a part of that food chain. I don't get eaten alive. That seems awful. But a moral way that could be done is if they kept a continuity of identity throughout all their incarnations, and so they knew that wasn't the end, and they would just go back to the other side and just get, reborn in another life. So as long as they maintained that identity and they were able to grasp what was going on about the truth of reality, it seems that the food chain becomes less kind of brutal and like morally questionable, if those conditions are met. So that about sums it up. Thank you so much for watching this video. I appreciate it, especially if you stayed till the end. I think this is I love working on this stuff. I think it's pretty cool stuff. I think it's also important to have these discussions and to have them outside of kind of religious dogma, because they're serious questions that I don't think can be answered, you know, with kind of status quo stuff. I think we have to find the answer for ourselves. But eventually, locate objective truth that, we can all agree upon. So thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it very much. Once again, if you'd like to donate to my research effort, my Cash App is #CoffeeCrow420. Thank you.